sickle cell disease is a life-threatening disease. It is a disease that causes pain. When it is a blood disorder, that your child's blood, the cell is a sickle shape. So that sickle shape gets trapped in the vein and it causes pain. That pain can be anywhere in the body, and that pain can be extremely excruciating to the point where your child is screaming. And at that point, well, even prior to that, we have to take our child down to the hospital.
The Lewisham People's Commission of Enquiry, LPCI, shall examine the decision of the Secretary of State for Health to downgrade Lewisham Hospital and the context for this, the fundamental changes being made to the NHS over the last 30 years. The Commission will examine two things, but the first is broken into two parts. Firstly, the original vision and principles underpinning the NHS, with particular reference to the community it serves and its accountability to that community. The second part of the first point, the extent to which the vision and principles have been eroded by the imposition of the internal market and recent moves to open the NHS to external market forces, and the degree to which these changes have been openly debated. Secondly, the extent to which this process has culminated in the potential destruction of quality healthcare for the community of Lewisham and South East London, exemplified by the proposals for Lewisham Hospital. They can be summarised in this way: a downgrading of Lewisham Hospital from a major hospital status, the closure of the accident and emergency facility and all acute admitting wards, including the children's wards, intensive care, all emergency and complex surgery, a proposed small midwife-led birth unit without, in other words, it won't have obstetric, medical or emergency backup. The plan, in fact, effectively is a sell-off of 60% of the Lewisham Hospital estate.
This legislation that came in 2012 is a serious, sustained attack on the very principles and ethics of the National Health Service. But you are not pursuing just the normal objection to any hospital closure. You are actually pioneering a people's challenge to the fundamental politics that underlies it.
It is acknowledged that changes are required for acute healthcare to be organised effectively in South East London. However, such changes need to start with the needs of the population of South East London and not the financial and productivity needs of the healthcare providers. Throughout his draft report, the TSA adopted a strict provider focus and failed to take into account or assess any impact of his recommendations on the local population or the extent to which these changes destabilise other local systems and processes.
The market was opened up through the middle of the decade 2000 to 2010 by the introduction of the first private providers of clinical services. That had been an absolute taboo down to that time, and it was introduced under the Labour government of Tony Blair. And indeed, Gordon Brown, relying on an important Treasury document that has conveniently been forgotten in 2003, made a speech in which he pointed out that markets will never deliver healthcare if the healthcare is for all. Of course, markets can deliver wonderful healthcare for the rich and lousy healthcare or none for the poor. But to deliver good healthcare for all, which is what Bevan wanted, they won't do it, they can't do it.
To your knowledge, was there informed debate about the fundamental nature of that change to the chain of accountability at the time of the passing of the bill?
I don't think there was. As Lord Owen rightly said, we were promised in the last election no more top-down changes. Within months of the election result, we had a white paper proposing this drastic reorganization. So there was no debate before the election, there was no mandate, as Lord Owen says. Prior to that, in the stages through which the NHS was broken up and turned into a set of businesses independent of the Department of Health, it was always presented as modernization, or in the name of choice, or patient-led change, patient-set orientation. At no point was it ever represented to the public that this was preparation for turning the NHS into a set of organizations competing with private companies. In fact, I would go further and say we should not forget that consistently since 2010, the government has denied that this is a privatization measure.
It's not a local issue. So the national policies include the use of private finance, which is making the whole system unaffordable locally, because South London Healthcare Trust has not one, but 6 PFI schemes. So if I tell you that for every hospital that's built, you could have had 2 or 3 running, that's what you're paying for, you begin to see the scale of the problem. And the second problem is that other government policies include a deliberate policy of underfunding trusts. So trust incomes are falling while the PFI charges are rising. And the one thing that we know from the Francis report in mid-start was that the focus on financial targets was to the detriment of patient care. The managers put the financial targets before they put the needs of the patients. And that meant they cut the services, they cut the staff, and there was no good quality of care. We now have lots of mid-staffs in the making here, not just in South East London, but across the country.
I think it's really important to state the Secretary of State for Health had stated that we would be left with a small but safe A&E. I think it's really important to say that there is no such thing. It does not exist. We know what an A&E is. You have to be able to see 24/7 undifferentiated patients no matter where they're coming from, whether they're coming via ambulance, whether they walk in by themselves, and for the full spectrum of medical problems. And in addition, you need to have 7 essential services in support of that A&E department. What they have stated is that Lewisham would lose 4 of those essential services: pediatrics, acute medicine, surgery, and in addition, intensive care. That is not an emergency department. That is not an A&E, safe, small, or otherwise. So this is a model that is known only to the Secretary of State himself and Sir Bruce Keogh.
What do the proposals mean for maternity patients?
It's going to be very interesting because we currently deliver just over 4,000 women at Lewisham each year. I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation of women who would be considered safe to deliver in a standalone midwifery-led unit, which is what Mr. Hunt has proposed for us. And it would be approximately 12% of those 4,000 women. They could only have women who had had a baby successfully, normally before, who weren't overweight, who had no scars on their uterus from a caesarean section or any other surgery, who didn't have any other comorbidity, who didn't have a yen for an epidural, for example, who didn't have any other medical problems, and in whom no emergency could be foreseen. One of the problems with maternity work is that emergencies are inevitable and unpredictable. And that's why you need people like me and my colleagues, because you cannot always look at somebody and say, you're going to have a problem, say, with bleeding excessively after your baby is born, or you're going to have a sudden rise in your blood pressure, or your baby's heartbeat is suddenly going to become abnormal unexpectedly quickly in labour. I don't have second sight, I've just got 30 years experience. And I know that even women who are purported to be low risk can often change very quickly. And whilst at the moment, women who deliver in our birth centre who need immediate obstetric help can be transferred quickly along a corridor and up to our labour ward, in Mr. Hunt's vision, they will be transferred, as we have heard, slowly in an ambulance to another hospital. I would be terrified if that was me or if that was my daughter.
In Lewisham, there are 63,000 children under 19.
And Greenwich?
And across the 6 boroughs, over 300,000. In Greenwich, it's approximately the same, so about 120,000 for Lewisham and Greenwich.
What was the consultation on the part of the Secretary of State in respect of children?
Including the TSA process?
Yes.
The consultation from Matthew Kershaw and the Trust Special Administration process was virtually zero. And there wasn't a single piece of data about children. So, and they'd been forgotten. And there was no planning at all done for it. And when that was raised with the TSA team, they were actually shamefaced about it.
So what was the data that was used?
Well, there isn't any data about children in the report.
So to what extent has there been any professional analysis?
Of children's needs,
Yeah.
Zero. I would absolutely say zero. And senior people in their process confessed to that.
So what does this mean for the children of Lewisham?
I'm starting from the fact that we have vulnerable, ill children in a deprived population. They're taking out the local hospital, they're reducing access to a deprived population with all the things we've heard, and it will lead to worse care, absolutely lead to worse care.
Clearly, although Lewisham, as has been said this morning, is a young borough, we still have many, many elderly people who have complex care. There are many people within the borough that live on their own and are very frail, with very high levels both of social care and of health needs.
Are you saying that they're at risk of social isolation?
And they're very much at risk of social isolation, which can impact on their health needs.
Now, I'd like to move on, if I can, to the issue of the impact of the TSA proposals on integrated care and care delivery for this vulnerable group.
I think that the integrated care will be destroyed because we won't be seeing these patients in Lewisham. The barriers will be much more difficult to get across. They'll be going to Woolwich A&E or even to King's, and if they end up in King's or Guy's and St Thomas's, it's much more difficult to implement those integrated pathways. They're certainly not going to see the same therapist or same doctor in the hospital as they would do in the community as they do now. So I think all those pathways that we've spent the last few years building will be destroyed.
Now, what arrangements has Lewisham already made to separate off those conditions which would benefit from specialist rather than speedy intervention?
Since we do know that for some conditions, centralised care is better, and that's why since 2009, all patients with strokes have been centralised. They haven't been coming to Lewisham, they've been coming to King's or to Princess Royal in Farnborough. Sorry, that's 2011. But 2009, all heart attacks have been diverted either from A&E in Lewisham or by the London Ambulance Service to specialised heart attack centres. And we know this improves, the centralisation of these has resulted in a better mortality for stroke and heart attack. But they're the only situations where this applies.
Could I just ask you then, what impact will these changes have on patients for whom speed is of the essence?
Well, the An example of that is meningitis, where it's been shown that what's important for meningitis is the speed you get antibiotics into the patient, not where it's delivered. And so the Secretary of State made a very surprising claim in his speech when he announced his decision that meningitis patients would benefit. That's completely contradicted by these specialist societies and the evidence.
And so you've heard the government soundbite. What soundbite might you prefer?
Well, I think Lewisham lives will be lost by this. The fact that you can close a successful, solvent district general hospital with care that's deeply rooted in the community, as we've seen from the last video, and with above average, better than average mortality, and just replace that somewhere else, I think that's a very dangerous leap of faith.
The changes recommended by Matthew Kershaw must satisfy what are called the 4 tests. Could you explain to us what they are?
The changes must have support from GP commissioners. The public patients and local authorities must have been genuinely engaged in the process. The recommendations must be underpinned by a clear clinical evidence base, and the changes must give patients a choice of good quality providers.
The Secretary of State claims that the proposals have clinical support. What do you say about that?
Well, I think it's already evident from other people that they certainly don't have Lewisham clinical support. From my colleagues in other CCGs, the other CCGs are obviously in a very different position, and so you shouldn't be too surprised if their responses were different. But all of those responses clearly stated that they had significant concerns that needed to be answered, and they were also saying that throughout the process. Colleagues in Southwark concerned about the impact on King's College Hospital, colleagues in Bromley on the Prue, and none of those questions have been answered. So again, they've just been brushed over. So no, everyone's happy, this is the best thing since sliced bread.
Finally, if Jeremy Hunt were here today or is watching this, and Dion, is there anything you want to say?
You just need a reality check.
Yeah, I think that's a good note. Thank you very much. As chair of this campaign, what has this campaign shown you as to the people of Lewisham?
What can this...
Yeah, what has it shown you? What does it reveal to you
about the
people of Lewisham?
What it reveals about the people of Lewisham is, A, they really value the NHS, and they're prepared to fight. They're prepared to fight. They don't take things lying down. They are, I think they're prepared to show passion, but also intelligence. You know, the whole level of critique we've had today and the evidence has been amazing. And I think people here are very determined. That's why, whatever happens, we're going to keep on fighting to defend our hospital.
May I say, I've been involved in many inquiries of different kinds. And this has been one of the most disciplined, most focused, and most efficient inquiries generated by public conscience, effectively. The public are no longer going to put up with being misled, with false information. The public are no longer going to put up with oppressive dictatorial diktats, essentially, from a government not interested